Since I was big enough to lift my father's books, I dreamed of one day authoring my own, a life spent in the company of literature and history. How proud my parents were when I alone was selected among hundreds to join the ranks of the great imperial historians. In truth, below my withering facade of humility, there bubbled an emerging wellspring of arrogance. What a fool I was. Cloistered in my libraries and ignorant to the world, I read my books, wrote my treatises, and passed judgment on the world, mistaking hubris for knowledge. It was one of these treatises that earned me the privilege of leading the historical expedition to Skyrim to document the events of the great dying of Fourth Era 200 to 202. Never before had the events of those days been committed to parchment, and for some inexplicable reason, my superiors had selected me to complete the task. I was only 22 years of age, a young, idealistic, self-important youth with nothing but a treatise on imperial governmental traditions of the Third Era to my credit. A wise man would have asked, why me? What makes Spurius Teufel, third son of a fisherman with only a bland book on governmental procedure, qualified to record perhaps the two most important and mysterious years in our collective history? But in the pride and self-delusion of my youth, these were questions not to be voiced aloud, lest I acknowledge my fallibility. At times, I longed to be that young man once again, so confident, so very singular of purpose. Perhaps it is the mortal condition to recall with longing the days of our youth, when faced with the truth of our own mortality. Perhaps, for most, this is the common refrain, but I lament the loss of my ignorance. Before I understood the truth, before its burden became mine alone to bear. And so, in lusting after ignorance, I commit the greatest sin of the scholar, to wish for blindness, to crave the lie in my weakest moments. This is my accounting, my final treatise to the world, a recorded account of the events and people of another time, laying bare the truth of those days and of my own self-aggrandizement. I have observed genuine horror, true suffering, and authentic heroism, and even now, as I write these pages, I commit my final act of cowardice. With these words, I inflict myself upon the world as a ravaging disease that corrupts the bliss of ignorance. I am Spurius. After weeks at sea, I have finally disembarked in solitude to place my feet on Skyrim's hallowed ground. The journey from Anvil by sea was a trying experience and yet fascinating. Never would I have expected to lay eyes on such storied places as Stros Mackay and Daggerfall. Few of my humble family have set foot outside the Imperial City, to say nothing of taking to sea in a vessel other than a fishing boat. Even so, I am grateful to finally walk the soil again. I don't think I could have taken another day aboard that ship. Superior Mitterlin instructed me to make contact with a man named Stax upon my arrival. Once again, my expectations were far removed from reality. Stax is a rather large and rough-looking Nord gentleman. At some point, I imagine I will have to ask him of his story as well, but so far he's said almost nothing. His answers to my questions are mostly single-word responses and gestures. At this rate, I'll never learn anything new. Mr. Stax presented me with a horse. We set off with no preamble. Both mounts were loaded with what looked like light provisions and equipment, but most of the gear he seemed to be carrying on a gigantic pack on his back. I'd hoped to visit the capital, but that doesn't appear to be on his agenda. The mare that he provided me is well-bred but stocky breed. They seem ideally suited to the weather conditions here in Skyrim. Mr. Stax seems to find it amusing that she nearly bit my fingers off as I endeavored to stroke her nose. Perhaps I will leave care of these animals to him. The port at Solitude is larger than I would have thought possible. Solitude is so distant from the world I've known. I believe I had convinced myself that, despite the stories, I would only be convinced that civilization could exist this far north until I saw it with my own eyes. The city is perched upon a bridge of natural rock and appears to defy the laws of nature. It is truly a magnificent feat of construction and engineering. The weather here is frigid. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but from the stories I had heard that Skyrim was at least capable of some kinds of temperate weather. But this has been near blizzard conditions since the minute we sailed in. The snow and sleet is thick and freezing and clings to everything, including my robes. I'm just guessing, but I would have placed his age at around 60. However, he seems quite fit, and he's bedecked in armor and winter clothing. I must confess to a bit of worry about the armor and gear. I don't know much of the ways of the soldier, but it appears to be well used. Perhaps it's naive, but I was hoping that armor was no longer a necessity in Skyrim. After all, it's been almost 50 years since the close of the Civil War and other events. We are currently encamped outside an ancient Nord barrow that Mr. Stax calls Dead Man's Respite. I would like nothing more than to go inside and explore, but he has warned me against it, so I've had to content myself with inspecting the carvings on the edifice. Many of the glyphs are weather-worn to the point of being unrecognizable, but within the entrance and the archway, they're preserved much better. I've studied many ancient cultures in my career, but have never seen the work of the Nords in anything other than drawings. I think that many would consider their brand of construction primitive when compared to the Dwemer or the Aelids. However, these are massive blocks of solid granite, perfectly formed and fitted together with no mortar any kind. The entire edifice is held together by engineering alone. I believe the absence of intricate carvings is more likely to be a practical side effect of the materials available here. Placing detailed runes or pictograms on this granite would have been difficult to say the least. The Nord people strike me as too practical for such things. There's no doubt that Mr. Stax is nothing if not pragmatic. We had our longest conversation to date this evening when he suddenly stopped on an old stone bridge not far from this very barrow.
You have a cloak, Yar?
Actually, no. I have what you see here.
You come to Skyrim with no cloak? What is in the bag?
Well, these are my books, Goodman.
Books?
Yes, I have books, paper, inkwells, and charcoal.
Enough. We camp here. I know a place.
But the day is young.
And the Imperial is foolish. We camp here, and when the sun rises, we take a different route. No cloak.
It's abundantly clear that he's annoyed with me. I suppose he's right. There are times when I have my nose buried so deeply in the past that I don't consider the present. He rapidly established a camp, and within minutes had a fire kindled and some kind of stew in the works, for which I was deeply grateful. This place is bitterly cold, and the wind is biting and pitiless. I'm hoping that over a good meal, he might open up to me a bit more. Obviously, this man works for Robard Graves. It'd be nice to have some background about the man before meeting him in person. At this point, I know almost nothing. This barrow is quite amazing.
Yar.
These stones must weigh hundreds of pounds. I wonder how many barrows like this are hidden across the landscape.
Yar.
So, what do you do for Robard?
Are you his friend?
I'm sorry, whose friend?
Master Graves.
Oh no, I don't even know the man, but...
Then he is Master Graves to you.
Ah, I'm sorry, of course. Are you not a friend of Master Graves?
Employee and loyal servant.
Really?
how long have you worked in the employ of Master Graves?
47 years, 3 months, and 15 days.
Ah, that's very accurate. What exactly do you do for Master Graves?
Swing axes and do the count.
The Count.
Yar. 45.
Excuse me?
45 known barrows in Skyrim.
I see. Is that what you mean by count? You count barrels?
No, that would be idiotic. I count everything.
You mean like a clerk? You count money?
Everything. Money, product, efficiency, output, assets, allies, supplies, foodstuffs, employees, partners, rivals, their products, output, alliances, trade agreements.
Ah, yes, I see. You handle the books. Now, books I can understand.
No books.
Oh, sorry. I mean ledgers.
No ledgers.
You mean to tell me that you have all of Master Graves' business affairs stored in your head?
You do not listen. How do you interview if you do not listen? Master Graves' business affairs and the business affairs of his enemies.
All in your head.
Yar.
How is it possible for you to...
Go to sleep now.
I really have to write this down. Where did I put my journal? I know sleeping would have been the prudent thing, but I just couldn't. Mr. Stacks does not talk much, but what he did say speaks volumes about him and his employer. He obviously holds Master Graves in high regard. To think that he's been in the employ of this man for more than 47 years and does not refer to him by his first name, or even as a friend for that matter. And could it really be possible that he had all the details of Graves' business archived in his head? I've come to understand that certain unscrupulous business people tend to avoid committing such business details to paper, but that's typically necessitated by nefarious business dealings and dodging the scrutiny of those entrusted with enforcement of imperial law. With any luck, I'll be able to press him for more tomorrow. But right now, I need to write all this down. This morning, I awoke to the clamor of packing. Stacks seemed to be in a hurry. The tent was thrown wide, and all the gear, with the exception of my bedroll and me, were actually already packed. I got up, and he forced some gruel into my hands, which seemed to be the remains of last night's stew mixed with some other ingredients that I couldn't identify. When I asked him what was in it, he flatly replied, "Magic." I'm not sure if he hates me or if this is simply his way, but a hot breakfast more than made up for the terse companionship. I had expected that we would return to the road, but instead, we headed upstream. We stopped to speak with some locals, and he traded for some crab legs, the likes of which I have never seen before. They were immense, and the color of the stone that seems so prevalent in this area. Further upstream, he pointed out the creatures, and we gave them a wide berth. He calls them mud crabs, and they were truly frightening. I confess that anything with more than 2 legs I find unnerving, including this horse. We passed an encampment today that looked quite extensive. Stacks instructed me specifically not to look toward the palisade walls of the camp. Why would that matter? Is looking at someone a provocation in Skyrim? At this point, I made yet another ill-fated attempt at conversation with the man. "So, Mr. Stacks, where are we headed? Why did we not go back to our previous course?"
We go south. South because Imperial Academic has no cloak.
Ah, well, yes, I'm sorry about that. Is it a significant diversion from your planned course?
13 and 3 miles. Half a day lost.
I see.
Do you?
Do I what?
See.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
The Imperial does not listen. Stacks hopes he sees twice as well to compensate.
Look, Mr. Stacks, I'm not sure why.
No, not look. The Imperial speaks, and Stacks listens. Look makes no sense. Perhaps the academic is confused with the relationship between look and listen.
No, I'm not confused. It's merely a figure of speech.
It is breath, wasted. Wasted on words, unnecessary to communication.
Now listen here, Mr. Stacks. You may not like me.
Stacks has already established that he is listening. He does not require you to command him to do so.
By the gods, you're impossible to talk to.
Stop the mouth. There are children nearby, playing with weapons. Prepare yourself.
Children?
Stay behind me and defend yourself. Or maybe you can hit them with your bag of books.
I have never seen a battle in reality, and this one in particular would not be believed by any who read this account. It was frightening beyond description, but even more compelling was the way in which it was fought. Stax wielded his shovel like the Nordic warriors of legend. The image in my mind's eye of the mighty Ysgramor striding the battlefield was tempered by the peculiar and yet distinctive clang of the shovel as it met skulls. I truly felt sorry for these unfortunates. It was clear that they'd gotten much more than they bargained for. Mr. Stax directed me to wait in a location that afforded me a distant view of the fight, but in the heavy snow and growing wind, it soon became very difficult to discern the details of the battle. I saw him appear once again on the road and breathed a sigh of relief as he began coming back. I must admit that despite my concealed location, I felt rather exposed, and with that brooding fort at my back, I could not help but wish for the secure company of my guide. However, even as I began to feel some remote sense of relief, he stopped and dropped his shovel. The bile of panic rose in my throat. Had he been injured? Why would he stop? Something was wrong. To my horror, he wrenched a huge sword from the body in the road and began to climb the hill once again. I soon lost sight of Mr. Stax in the blinding snow. Stax was my lifeline in this harsh place. With creeping and inexorable horror, it began to dawn upon me that should anything happen to this old man, Spurius Teufel would be dead, or worse. What have I done? What am I doing here? There's something very sickeningly wrong with this place. I have done enough research to know that even this far north, there is not supposed to be bitter cold and blizzards in sun's height. This is the height of summer. And I have read the histories, seen the drawings of the tundra grasses, the wildflowers in rainbows of colors across the endless plain.
Do your work. Thank you.
You won't get the best of me.
Now you
I love a challenge. You smear curse you.
You call yourself the North? This is the end for you.
Carve you into face.
Best you can do. You won't get the best of me.
I'll mount your head on my wall.
You need to do better than that. I'll paint the snow with your blood.
Close. Lord have mercy on you.
Tomorrow, the whites take you. good fight.
That was perhaps the longest afternoon of my life. The snow dampened my senses, and even as I strained to hear or see any sign of him, the weather and the sounds of the river conspired to keep me in darkness. In the darkness of my own imagined horrors, I could not move. I could not eat. I could do nothing but wait and pray to all the gods for his return and my swift delivery from this nightmare. More than once, I thought I perceived the sounds of distant and terrible battle, but the weather and my palpable fear robbed me of any desire to comprehend more.
See you.
The infernal weather makes the perception of time virtually impossible. It occurs to me now that I had not seen any glimpse of the sun in a very long time, but after what seemed an eternity, I saw Mr. Stacks striding down the road. He beckoned to me and I cautiously approached with the horses in tow. As I neared, I could see that he was splattered in gore. Sweat ran down his nose from beneath that demonic-looking helm, and his barrel chest heaved. "Come," he said. "We must move. This is not over." "What happened?" I asked, with undisguised panic. "We are ambushed. This is not an attack of opportunity," he replied in his infuriatingly placid manner. "We are ambushed? Not over?" As we reached the crossroad, I was frightfully and horribly assailed by the scale of our situation. Lying in the road were bodies. In the moment, I was unable to take in the full magnitude of the scene, but as I write this, my admittedly unreliable memories tell me that there had to be at least 10. They had been placed in a grisly line across the road. They were male, female, and of mixed races, and in various types of mismatched armor and clothing. But there were others who wore a uniform. It was like nothing I was familiar with, but it was a uniform. Who were they, and why had they attacked us? I had so many questions, but Mr. Stacks was in no mood to answer them. He quickly began pulling gear from the bodies with practiced efficiency. That was when my nightmare became even more vivid. The silence was suddenly broken by screams from the horses. Stacks shouted at me to stay close and drew his massive blade, rushing the picketed mounts. Into the darkness, this old man launched himself, and like an angry bull slammed into the villains. The ring of steel was deafening, and suddenly overshadowed by the terrible sound of rending flesh. In those desperate and horrifying moments, I suffered a mental collapse that cannot be explained. I watched as this huge, scarred and stoic man mechanically ran a man through and lifted him bodily from the ground. He turned to shout something at me, but I could hear nothing. Even as I saw his lips moving, I could hear only that ring. He suddenly turned from me and began to charge once again up the hill and into the darkness. He must have been meeting another attack. I cannot be sure, for I ran without direction and without plan. Blind panic had finally overtaken me completely. Spurious. The words were distant, as if I were submerged. Spurious. It was my name. I slowly began to emerge from my fog to find myself cowering in the snow. It was dark. I was freezing, and someone was calling my name. In a rush of muted understanding, the events of the day slowly returned, and with them, the rising panic. "It's okay, boy, it's over." That's what he said. And there he stood, Stax, huge and horrifying. He was looking down at me with that eye and those scars. I could smell the blood. That massive sword resting casually over his shoulder, and he was attempting to offer me comfort. But when I glanced up at him, all I could imagine was that his face was the last thing that so many men and women had seen before their lives were brutally snuffed out. But at that moment, something curious happened. He said, "You must calm your mind. Your mind is your weapon. You must not allow it to grow dull. The threat is past. I stand vigil while you hone your weapon. We will continue when you are ready." It was a singularly strange thing to be comforted in this way by this man, and had I not seen his lips move, I would not have believed him capable of such words. But they calmed me. He stood over me like a great tower and waited in silence as I gathered myself. Something told me that this brief mercy was his way of offering sympathy. A man incapable of the more tender emotions, but able to understand them on an intellectual level. Standing watch was his way of showing concern. I retreated into my mind, meditating on the calm images that have so often assisted me in solving the complex riddles of history or in breaking through the most difficult bouts of writer's block. Now, I used them to focus and calm my nerves. We stayed in this state for a very long time, but I seemed to be outside time itself. When I emerged from the reverie, it was very near dawn. Stax stood there, massive sword on his shoulder, scanning the horizon. "You are ready?" he asked flatly. "Yes," I replied. "Come, we have work to do." We ascended the hill once again and began the grisly work of going through the bodies. I cannot say that I became accustomed to it. I was merely numb, and I did what I could to assist him. The gear was separated into neat piles based on some criteria I could not understand. It was, as I observed Mr. Stax going through their purses and packs, that I realized Skyrim is still a land of wild appetites and alpha dogs. I get the impression that one does not live here, but rather survives by personal prowess or pack association. It seems that I have been taken in by the right pack, and as unsavory as that fact is, I am profoundly grateful at the moment. Stax began to systematically pick through the pile and selected items that he held up to my chest, obviously testing for fit. In the end, he bestowed upon me a mismatched assortment of fur items that, while warm, looked ridiculous. My displeasure must have been written upon my face, as there was no end to his laughing. Had my pride not been so thoroughly crushed, I would have marveled at the transformation of this man with a laugh. I did not think him capable of such a thing, and I must admit that he looks even more frightening when he's amused. seems that during the panic of those few chaotic hours, one of our 2 mounts had fled. After a short search, we were clearly not going to be able to find it, and Mr. Stacks advised that we move on. So with that, we loaded all the salvaged gear onto the last remaining horse. Given the load, we were forced to walk, but it was a short walk mercifully to Rorikstad. Even along the way, there were still things to contend with. Gigantic rats he referred to as skeevers. I've heard of these but never seen one in my life. They're quite disgusting, and he hacked down one after another along the road. I don't know what to make of this place. There are threats at every turn. Even the most innocuous road contains hazards of unimaginable horror. I believe that my chaperone must have taken mercy on me and my frayed nerves as we stopped and settled into an inn in a small rural hamlet called Rorikstad. This place is called the Frost Fruit Inn, and it's sparse and yet very comfortable when compared to the previous night's accommodations. We shared a lovely meal of cabbage soup, fresh bread and cheese, and something called a crostata. Oh, and refreshing mead. I'd not had mead before, but I find it quite delightful. Following our meal, I purchased several more meads in an effort to ply Stacks for information on Master Graves, but I suspect that after the events of the last 24 hours, it was as much a subconscious balm to my mind as anything. He seems to appreciate my expression of gratitude and was a bit more forthcoming, but my methods of attempting to ply him with drink backfired.
You, Mr. Stacks, must have a great respect for Master Graves, given your extensive tenure as an employee.
Yar.
What of his health? I was made to understand that he was having some difficulties.
Master Graves has been afflicted for years.
For years? What sort of affliction?
Nervous attacks. Nervous attacks. He shakes and becomes mad with anger and sadness.
Madness? What does he say in his fits of madness?
It is not for us to discuss the personal struggles of Master Graves. You may ask him yourself if you must know.
I understand. I understand completely. So, how did you come to be employed by Master Graves?
It was Stack's good fortune that brought Master Graves to him.
Oh, interesting. I think I better go to bed.
Not here. Go over there.
I'm just gonna go lay down. I'll see you in the morning. Maybe.